Again, we are two lay people. We are not theologians. We don't have the authority of the church. We don't have the office. And this is a good conversation to have.
It's a conversation we need to have, I think.
Between two friends having coffee and enjoying it. And actually it's important because that's how we become better, and we can do better by thinking, exploring ideas, trying to, again, what is true? How are we going to improve ourselves, and how we choose the better things? And that's part of that discernment, which is one of the great points you make is, okay, is this a true teaching of the Catholic Church, or is this heresy? Is this going to help me, or is it going to jeopardize my life? And that's part of growing up in our faith, understanding, knowledge of the Catholic faith.
Okay. Ready to get started? Okay, so we're going to keep this nice and civil today. A Sedevacantist meets a Pope-splainer.
We start with the insults.
Get the ad hominems out of the way.
That's a good way of starting.
I'm only kidding.
No, I know. So we're going to talk about Sedevacantism. Adam, can you explain the meaning? What does Sedevacantism? Because a lot of people, they don't know the word. So what does the word mean? Where does it come from, and what does it mean?
Well, I know how much you like your etymology. So sedevacante is the Latin root word of Sedevacantism, and it simply means empty chair. Now, how does this relate to the Catholic faith? Well, it's a matter of questioning and doubting with reasonable evidence the validity of the current claimants to the papacy. From, generally speaking, the position is held that from John the 23rd all the way till Francis are either anti-popes that have not yet been declared anti-popes, or there is reasonable evidence by which we would doubt their legitimacy as holding the papal office or the chair of St. Peter.
And what's an antipope?
An antipope is generally someone who has been declared by the church to have not held the office. And throughout history, there have been numerous antipopes, and they have ranged from anywhere between days and years. And I believe the longest antipope reigned for something like 8 years. So quite a long time. And so even in that case, when you have an antipope in office, then the chair of St. Peter is technically empty, because you cannot have a non-pope in the chair of St. Peter. So that, I think, helps support the position of Sedevacantism in explaining, well, have we ever had a period in history where the chair of St. Peter was empty for an extended period of time? Well, yes, there's been as many periods of sedevacante as there has been popes, because every time a pope dies, whether it takes them 1 minute or 3 years or 5 years to elect a new pope, then in that case, the chair is empty. But that doesn't mean that the office dissolves, because you think of even in a secular monarchy, if the king dies, does that mean the monarchy is dissolved? No, it just means that the office is unoccupied, it's vacant.
Right.
So,
and what about legitimacy? You mentioned a pope is legitimately the pope.
Right.
So explain that, please.
Okay, so for a pope to be pope, he must first be Catholic. Okay, so you can't be elected, you can't be ordained a priest or ordained a bishop or even baptized into the faith unless you hold the faith or were,
right.
You have to both be baptized in the faith and profess the faith to become a Catholic. And from there, you must be a Catholic a Catholic layperson before you can be ordained a priest or a bishop. And most importantly, you must be a Catholic and in good standing. You must have the faith and profess it in order to be elected into the papacy. what happens when a pope is elected who does not profess the true faith? Well, it's happened in history where we've had anti-popes who were declared as such, and that raises serious questions of how do we go about determining if a pope is anti-pope. And in the current situation in the church, where we've been warned and it's evident that it's filled with modernists, and we know that modernism is the synthesis of all heresies, that we are dealing with people holding positions in the church, the Vatican II church, that are not Catholic because they are professing modernism. So in that sense, because they're not professing the true faith and they are denying basic dogmas of the faith, it certainly seems as if we should be questioning the legitimacy of their authority in recognizing their wrong, their heretical profession of the faith. For anywhere from endorsing LGBT agenda to the idea of universal salvation and religious indifferentism, things that have been clearly and infallibly been defined as Catholic teaching, that these Vatican II claimants are actively denying.
Okay, well, so when you talk about somebody is elected as a pope or bishop, because to be the pope, well, it's the bishop of Rome, the supreme pontiff, and has to be elected according to the law of the church. That's when we say you are legitimately the pope or the bishop, or you have been ordained in a legitimate fashion because you have followed the law of the church. So we have to look at the law of the church to define. So your premise is if the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, says something heretical, therefore he's...
if any Catholic professes heresy...
Yeah, but we're talking about Sedevacantism.
Yes.
So specifically about the Pope.
Specifically about the Pope, but generally speaking, if any Catholic professes heresy obstinately,
yes,
they cease to be Catholic.
Let's look at what the church says. Let's look at what the law of the church. So I looked up the canon when it says what's heresy.
Okay, so would you dispute the point that a Catholic who no longer professes the true faith because they're in heresy?
Heresy definition, canon law, right?
Yeah.
Canon law. Okay.
Would you say that a Catholic who professes heresy ceases to be Catholic?
So canon law. Well, never mind my opinion.
Yeah.
Let's look at what the church says. Heresy. So according to the canon law, heresy is the obstinate denial or obstinate doubt after the reception of baptism of some truth, which is to be believed by divine and Catholic faith.
That's right.
Okay. So let's say that you are individually you say something heretical because you didn't know.
Yes.
And you can die without knowing that was a heresy.
Yeah.
And it happens all the time. And there are many heresies. But here the church tries to define that as the obstinate denial, obstinate doubt. Let's say that you deny that Jesus Christ was not God. He was just a good teacher, prophet, but that's about it. Well, that's heresy.
Yeah.
But if you were baptized Catholic, so if you are baptized Catholic, in order to be saved, you need to be baptized, right?
Right.
Do you stop being Catholic because you at one point you use heresy? And here is the obstinate denial.
Yes. So would that rule out then like a material heretic? Because a material heretic is not obstinately denying the doctrine of faith. They're either confused or they don't know. So they're not a heretic as it fits this definition. So even though they are in material heresy, they're not a heretic. Right. And I think that's an important distinction to make, because even though they may be wrong, they have not ceased to be members of the church, because they are confused.
And also you can learn about it and go to confession, or you can change your opinion.
Exactly.
Right. So let's apply that to the bishops and more specifically to the Pope, because we're talking about Sedevacantism.
Material heresy or heresy?
Both.
Okay.
So let's break it down. Material heresy, and explain. So let's say that in this case, Pope Francis says something that is heretical.
Yes.
Now, according to canon law, that doesn't stop the individual being a pope.
What does it say?
Oh, let me look it up. You might.
I think Canon 2197 of the 1917 code does talk about it. I don't know where it's located in the new Canon Law.
Do you have the text?
On my phone, but it's recording.
Okay. And what does it say, more or less?
I don't remember word for word what it says. I don't want to misquote it, but that is the section which deals with heresy.
Here's a problem.
The delictive heresy.
Yeah, but here's a... Oh, well, the current canon law, I can tell you what the current canon law says about the office of the Pope, the Roman Pontiff. So and this is important because when we have the debates about Sedevacantism, we can say, in my opinion, or St. Robert Bellarmine said this, or this Pope said in the 13th century or 14th century. That's perfectly fine as part of the debate, part of the discussion. But the Church doesn't rule herself by theologians' opinions. There is a law, obviously based on tradition, but also based on the divine right. In this case, there's only one Pope. There are no two popes. There are no three popes. Mm-hmm. In some governments through history, there have been three presidents. But the Church, because of the divine instructions by our Lord Jesus Christ, says, well, you are St. Peter, right? And then all the bishops consequently have been elected because of that.
Yeah. And
then according to canon law, so you accept that the Church follows canon law. You have to follow canon law.
Yes, but then if the 1980 or the newest version of the canon law was propagated by questionable popes, then do we follow that canon law, or do we use the 1917?
And what about before? Why in 1917, at one point when it was implemented, the canon law of 1917, there were some canons that were new.
That's right.
Today, in 1917, did they follow, or in 1919, did they follow the canon law of 1917, or did they follow the canon law from the 13th century?
I mean, the only reason I would contest it is because if the canon law that is there now is propagated by popes and claimants that didn't have the authority to do that, then wouldn't that...
Well, that's the key. They don't have the authority. You mentioned at the beginning in your presentation that it has to be legitimate, and you talked about the authority of the Pope.
Yep.
The authority of the Pope doesn't come from... Where does it come from?
From God.
Right, but then there is a law, and the Pope gets chosen by the cardinals according to the law of the Church. Mm-hmm. And that's where the authority comes from. They have been given the authority by the cardinals.
But a Sedevacantist would claim that he has lost his authority, his jurisdiction, from the moment he professed heresy.
Well, that's an opinion.
But that's
an opinion. Yeah. Which is respectable, but it's only an opinion. Mm-hmm. But we don't follow the opinion, we follow the law of the Church.
I mean, I don't think that rules out that it's a possibility.
Yeah, as a discussion, we discuss it, which is interesting but when it comes to the nitty-gritty, the bishop issues an instruction on punishment or establishes a new church following the rule of the law of the Church. Doesn't follow just an opinion because somebody said, well, you cannot start a new church, a new building or a new basilica or a new congregation. It's no, you follow you cannot have the seminary because somebody gave an opinion. No, you follow the law of the bishop follows the law of the Church. The clergy they follow the law of the church. There are opinions, but when it comes to how you conduct yourself in an institution, it's the same at university. In university or in a hospital, there are opinions.
Okay.
And in society, but you have to follow the law. For example, here.
But what do we do if Francis isn't following the law of the church?
Well,
what do we hold him to the same standard?
Well, that's a very important point. And what does the law of the church says about that? That the Supreme Pontiff has supreme authority.
If he is the Supreme Pontiff. If he is the Supreme... And what's called into question here, I want to clarify. What's called into question is not us judging the Holy See as heretical, but it's simply identifying that this man, Jorge Bergoglio, that he has, we have identified that he has committed a material heresy.
Okay.
Being that
who is we?
Any Catholic.
Yeah, but any Catholic, we don't have the authority.
No, we don't. We don't have the authority to judge that or to judge him, but we know what a heresy is. And so we can identify that heresy, but obviously we can't pass judgment on the man. So that being said, we can raise doubts and concerns about the man, but we don't have the authority to depose him.
Right.
And that's the key. Think even back to the Great Western Schism. You had, I forget his name. There was a saint that was on the side of the popes in Avignon. And there was Saint Catherine of Siena, who was on the side of the Italian pope. Both very reputable saints. During this time of the Great Schism, the Great Western Schism, you didn't have Catholics who were just sitting there like, well, we need to wait for a declaration from the church to figure out what's going on here. So we're just going to flip a coin and we're going to decide based on that whether we follow the proclaimed Pope of Avignon or the proclaimed Pope of Italy or the proclaimed Pope of Pisa, right? You had people who were searching for the truth because they were raising doubts on these matters. People had reasonable doubt and evidence to believe that the Pope in Avignon was not a legitimate Pope because you can't have more than one Pope at the same time. The difference between the Great Western Schism now is during the Great Western Schism, all of those popes, all of those claimants to the papacy were still Catholic and they were still professing the exact same true faith. That is not the case in the Vatican II sect. They have changed all of the sacraments and the rites. They've changed the sacrament of ordination. All the sacraments are different. They've changed the Mass. They've changed and attacked the faith from its very foundation. And what did Pope Pius X say about modernism? Well, it's an attack on the faith. John the 23rd declared himself a modernist. He declared himself a modernist. He said that the church needs rebirth. It needs renewal. Well, saying that the church needs rebirth is also against Catholic teaching, because Catholic teaching professes and proclaims solemnly that the church never needs to be changed. So even though we can't depose these popes, we can, and taking the lesson from the Great Western Schism, we can raise our doubts towards his legitimacy, and we don't need to wait for a declaration to do that. Because if they're compromising our faith, and for me as someone who's trying to convert, if I follow what Francis teaches, I believe that the doctrine of justification is good. I believe that proselytism is evil and condemned. I believe that the death penalty is condemned. If I adhere to the teachings of Francis, then I'm going to hell, because the things he teaches about are against the faith. And that to me is what sends alarm bells ringing.
I understand. I mean, very, very valid points, but it has nothing to do with the premise or that the Pope or the seat is vacant because the Pope is not the Pope.
Right. So in that case, I would say that Now, there are what you would call dogmatic Sedevacantists who say that, yes, the chair is empty. Yes, the lay people have the authority to depose a pope, but that's usurping authority they don't have.
That's not Catholic.
That's not Catholic. So there's a difference there.
And that is being condemned.
That's right. So we can't do that because we don't have the authority to do that. But what I'm saying is because there's reasonable doubt, the chair may in fact be empty, but we don't have...
Reasonable doubt, explain that to me.
Well, given that, okay, let me tell you what the saints say, and then I'm going to show you or explain to you how I think that there is evidence, using that evidence and what the church teaches.
Evidence or opinion?
Evidence.
Evidence of what?
Heresy.
Yeah, but the premise is, so we are starting the debate from two different perspectives. Your perspective, correct me if I'm wrong, is because there is heresy, therefore the Bishop of Rome, the Supreme Pontiff, loses the chair, loses the office.
I believe that.
Yeah, but that's the premise.
But that's an opinion.
Yeah. My premise is everything is to do with how the church runs herself and is following the law of the church that has been established by the church. And these are basically, they're saying, these are our rules of engagement. This is how we follow the church. How we're going to conduct. How you're going to choose the pope, the authority of the pope, and all the rules of the church. And then let's look at what the church says. So the Canon Law on the Roman Pontiff is very short, actually. Yeah. It's very short. With other issues, it's longer, but in a way, it tells you. And the Roman Pontiff and the College of Bishops, Canon 330. Just as by the Lord's decision, St. Peter and the other apostles constitute one college, so in a like manner, the Roman Pontiff, the successor of Peter, and the bishops, the successors of the apostles, are united among themselves. So right there, this is this canon is already telling you, we the Catholic Church, this is how we conduct ourselves. There is only one Roman Pontiff, and then there are only the bishops, and then there is the College of Bishops who are going to elect the Roman Pontiff. Mm-hmm. And then the article number 1, the Roman Pontiff, specifically Canon 331. The Bishop of the Roman Church, in whom continues the office, the office given by the Lord uniquely to Peter. Obviously now we're talking about theology, because if somebody is not Catholic, it's like, well, what are you talking about? That this person who is now the Pope is something to do with Jesus Christ? Well, as Catholics, yeah, because Jesus Christ chose St. Peter.
That's right.
And then the Pontiff is the successor of St. Peter. So, and then the canon says to Peter, the first of the apostles, and to be transmitted, this is important, to be transmitted to his successors is the head of the College of Bishops. Right? The Pope, the Pontiff, is the head of the College of Bishops. And again,
yes,
in other institutions, there is a democracy and the head of the meeting doesn't have more authority than others. But in the church, it's different. Mm-hmm. And the canon says the vicar of Christ, he's not Christ, he's the vicar of Christ, and the pastor of the universal church on earth. By virtue, and this is key, by virtue of his office, he possesses supreme, full, immediate, and universal ordinary power in the church, which he is always able to exercise freely. That's the key, and this is in any debate when it comes to Sedevacantism. It's crucial to have. It's like, by virtue, because he's the vicar of Christ, because he's the successor of St. Peter, the church recognizes that the head of the church, the Pope, has supreme authority, full authority, immediate and universal ordinary power in the church, which is he's always able to exercise freely. And nobody, according to the canon, the church, the law of the church, he's not subject to any court.
No, that's true.
then in order to declare that the Pope has said something egregious, that he has done something, he's causing harm to the church, or he has to be deposed, the canon law doesn't look into that.
Right. So that would say, okay, and I agree with you on this.
And the canon law does look into when a bishop loses his office,
yes,
but not the Supreme Pontiff.
Okay. So using that logic, we know then that to depose, no one can depose a pope, even if, say, a council was held. A council would not have the authority to depose a pope. Even a formal declaration from the bishops or any clergyman would not have the power to depose a pope, right? Because there's no process in canon law which states that.
The authority to call a council, it has to be, the Pope has, the Supreme Pontiff has to call the council.
Yes, so no council could depose a pope. And no, there's no dogma and there's no law that states that lay people or any subordinate Catholic to the Pope, being Supreme Pontiff, has the authority to depose him. Okay, we agree on that. Let's go back to the Great Western Schism for a second. During that time when there was... Why? Because at that time, there were two popes. There were two claimants to the papacy, and some Catholics believed that the Pope of Avignon was the true Pope.
Right.
Some Catholics thought that the Pope of Italy was the true Pope. The problem there is the church cannot have two popes. It can only have one Pope, as you stated. What came of that? Now, years later, because remember, popes came and died during the Great Western Schism. There were popes that were being reelected, and great confusion in the church because everyone thought, oh, the Pope in Italy is the Pope. Oh no, the Pope in France is the Pope. One of them had to be wrong. Couldn't that be the case today where it's not that we can depose the Pope, because even back then, no one could go up to the Pope of Avignon and say, we have the power by which to depose you. No one could go up to the Pope in Italy and depose him. They had to actually resign willingly, right? Given that logic, we know that, okay, no one can depose the Pope, but are Catholics going to be condemned for holding the opinion that a man is not Pope, who they have reasonable evidence to believe that he's not Pope? In that case, there can't be two popes.
That's a fallacy.
Well, okay, let me get to it. I understand that. I understand that there's a difference in application, absolutely. But what I'm saying is there are going to be times during the church's existence where, and you would agree, we are living in a time of crisis now. We are living in a time of crisis. So there's confusion. So can you not say then that a Catholic could hold reasonably, given everything that's happened since Vatican II, the bad fruits that have proceeded since Vatican II, the decline of the faith, the questioning of certain moral dogmas like religious indifferentism, the Assisi events, isn't that an obvious one where we see what's this Pope doing, inviting all these religions, leveling them out in the new modernist pantheon, and praying to all these different demons together. That to me at least says, okay, we're living in a time of confusion. There's a crisis in the church. As Catholics, can we not, given that evidence, have reasonable doubt that these popes may have lost authority since their heresy? And what did the saints say? Well, Saint Athanasius.
No, but just a second. They might have lost authority
from the moment they were preaching the heresy.
But based on what?
But
you are basing that on people's opinions, and I'm basing it on the law.
But their opinions,
the Church of the Law.
But why would they? Okay, but then you would have to ask, why would these saints hold these opinions? Why would this Pope Innocent III, why would he hold that opinion?
Well, very easy, because they are instructing the faithful, and they're instructing on what is the to think with the church. What is it to think as a Catholic, and what is the good for the church, for the soul? But in this specifically about the views, what is the Chair of St. Peter or the Pope should be teaching. And I understand that, and that's very good, because it's showing, like a good teacher, they are telling us, if you are the Pope, like if you are the president of the country or the prime minister or the king, this is how a good king or a good pope should behave. This is how a good pope should conduct the affairs of the church. That I understand that, and that's great, because as theologians and teachers and even popes, they were saying, if in future, if you're the pope, this is how you should conduct yourself to run the church.
Should or must?
Or must, or ought to.
I think that's an important distinction.
Or even ought to. But, it's like a guidance, which is terrific. But the reality is that the church follows the laws of the church. And then when you say they lose the office, well, who has the authority to say that the Pope has lost the office? And we have established that nobody has the power.
Nobody but the Pope. So here's what they say. Okay. Pope Innocent III says, quote, "Still the less can the Roman Pontiff glory because he can be judged by men, or rather can be shown to be already judged. If, for example, he should wither away into heresy because he who does not believe is already judged." So that's suggesting that the Pope in heresy, not that the Pope is judged by men, but his heresy can be judged by men.
But there's nothing about losing the office.
Let me get to that. This is St. Robert Bellarmine, quote, "A pope who is a manifest heretic automatically ceases to be pope and head, just as he ceases automatically to be a Christian and a member of the church. Wherefore, he can be judged and punished by the church. This is the teaching of all the ancient fathers who teach that manifest heretics immediately lose jurisdiction," unquote.
So he contradicts the previous one.
No, I would say that's...
Right, because the previous one you were saying that man cannot judge the Pope.
You're not judging the Pope, though. You're judging the man as a... Because the logic is he can't be Pope if he's a heretic. Because one cannot be a Pope and a heretic at the same time.
That's an opinion.
But that's based on the church's teaching.
And that's the premise, which is for debate is acceptable. But the reality is that the church has to follow the laws of the church.
Okay, let's go back here. Let's follow the logic. Okay.
We're talking about the Pope.
Let's get there. Okay. Can a heretic be a member of the Catholic Church?
No.
Okay.
But if you are a member of the Catholic Church, you have to profess the faith.
Exactly.
Now, and then we already talked about this. There are two types of heresies, but also...
I'm talking about a manifest heretic, like an actual heretic, not material, but can a heretic who, say, denies the Trinity, can he be a member of the Catholic Church?
Well, it falls into heresy, but can he correct himself or herself?
But he's outside the church until he corrects that heresy.
Heresy is heresy. You don't stop being a member of the Catholic Church. The baptism, you cannot erase the baptism.
No, but you can cease being a member of the church because although you fulfill the requirement of baptism, you don't require...
But that is apostasy. You're talking about apostasy.
Yes, because what is the consequence of heresy? The consequence of heresy, if you bring it to its logical conclusion, is apostasy.
No, that is a false argument. You can be a heretic and you cannot reject the faith. Somebody can be, you don't have to be a heretic and you say, I don't want to be Catholic.
Wait. You can be a heretic and not reject the faith.
The faith reject being a member of the Catholic Church or the authority, because to be a heresy, to be an apostasy is to reject the authority of the Pope. And to reject to say, I don't want to be a member of the Catholic Church.
Okay, what is the office of the papacy supposed to do? What is their main job?
Well, it has supreme according to the Canon Law.
But what is the job of the Pope? Isn't it to teach the faith?
Canon 332. The Roman Pontiff obtains full and supreme power in the Church by his acceptance of legitimate election together with episcopal consecration. Therefore, a person elected to the supreme pontificate who is marked with episcopal character obtains this power from the moment of acceptance. This is important. If the person elected lacks episcopal character, however, meaning he's not a bishop, he's to be ordained a bishop immediately. So in theory, a priest can become the Pope.
Okay, yeah.
But in order to be Pope, you have to be a bishop. If he happens that the Roman Pontiff resigns his office, it is required for validity that this resignation is made freely and properly manifested, but not that it is accepted by anyone. So again, this is important because the Pope acts freely and he's not subject to anybody.
Yes. Okay, but here's the the point these saints are making.
Yes.
And I'm trying to explain this as clearly as possible. I'm not refuting this at all. This applies to the Pope.
Right.
But the moment someone becomes a heretic is the moment they're no longer part of the church. And that means that because one cannot be a heretic and Pope at the same time. You can't be both.
Yeah, but
that's what the church teaching says infallibly.
Within the church, if you're the Pope, or the bishop, you have to follow they have to follow the laws of the church.
But what if they don't?
Well, okay.
Because we're seeing that they're not. They're obstinately denying the teachings of the church. I mean, Francis himself even said that he's not the vicar of Christ.
But that's the crux of the matter. You specifically are saying, okay, if Pope Francis says something heretical, therefore he loses his office. And I say, according to the laws of the church, there is nothing there to deprive, in this case, Pope Francis from his office.
But that's if you still believe a heretic can be Pope.
But that is an opinion, which is you're entitled to your opinion.
Okay,
but you are not following the laws of the church.
But neither is Francis. So what does it matter
What would you mean neither is Francis?
Well, Francis doesn't obey the laws of the church. He repeatedly attacks them. So again, do we hold them to at what point?
Give me an example. Of the laws of the church that he doesn't follow. So and also. Let's say that is true. Let's say that he doesn't follow a certain law. Does it deprive him from the office as the Pope? No.
It means that he immediately loses jurisdiction.
No, you should say he should lose jurisdiction. According to the laws of the church, he doesn't lose jurisdiction. He doesn't lose his office. What you are saying is, I'm so upset that Pope Francis is not doing this or that I don't want to believe that he's the Pope. I get that.
I don't think he's Pope.
Well,
and that is my opinion, but I can't depose him.
And you are entitled to your opinion.
Yes.
But that is not how the church governs herself.
Okay, so let's back up here. Okay. Now, when St. Robert Bellarmine lays out the conditions for what happens when there's claims of a heretical pope, he lays out 5 opinions. Okay, the first one is
opinions.
The first one is, and these are based on church teachings. Okay, the first opinion is that the pope can never lose the faith. So it doesn't matter what a pope does, or if they're good or bad, they can never lose the faith because they're guided by the Holy Spirit. You can agree with that opinion or not.
No, and even a bishop, if the bishop says, I don't believe and I reject the Catholic Church, obviously he loses, according to Canon Law, he loses.
So you would reject that opinion, that the Pope can never lose the faith? Can the Pope lose the faith, do you think?
As a human being, can he lose the faith? He could. As a human being, he could lose the faith.
So what would there be?
You can say tomorrow, the Pope can wake up tomorrow and say, I don't believe in God anymore. I don't believe in the Holy Trinity, and I want to leave the Catholic Church.
Okay.
He could.
So the first opinion is that the Pope can never lose the faith. And this is important because it comes back in the 5th opinion. So the first opinion is, doesn't matter what the Pope does, he can never lose the faith.
Right.
Second opinion is that the Pope can lose the faith, but not the papacy. That's just an opinion. He can lose the faith, he can cease to profess the Catholic faith, but he still has his jurisdiction and his power.
What does he mean by losing the faith?
that he falls into heresy.
But is that your opinion or that's?
No, that's what he writes. That if a pope falls into heresy, because if a pope falls into mortal sin, does he lose the faith? What happens when you fall into mortal sin?
Because losing the faith and saying something heretical, again, something heretical, you can correct yourself. Oh, yeah, I didn't know. Or
that would mean he's a manifest heretic.
Or you were teaching something that it was utterly false. It was a heresy. And then you get corrected by the bishops. And then you say, okay, yes, I stand corrected. And then, yeah.
Let's say in this case.
Because losing the faith, what I understand is that, okay, I used to believe in God and now I don't believe in God.
Okay, hypothetically, let's say that the Pope said that the Trinity doesn't exist, there's only God the Father. And then the bishops confront the Pope and say, this is heresy, is this what you mean? And the Pope says, yup, Jesus Christ didn't even exist.
Then we are in a pickle.
Okay, so that's an opinion. The Pope can lose the faith, he would still be Pope. Do you think that position is tenable? Personally, I don't. I don't think that position would be tenable.
Yeah, but our opinion doesn't matter.
Okay, so
we have to. The church has to follow the laws of the church.
But this is based on the laws of the church, because the problem is with this whole dilemma is there is no defined laws or dogma on what to do when a pope it becomes heretical. We know all of the things you said are true, but that's assuming that the pope is pope.
Yeah, the good news, we are not in that position.
That's where I object. Okay.
We are not in that position.
So if the pope loses the faith by denying dogma, even privately, then this position would say, if he denies it privately, he would not lose the papacy. If he denies it publicly, then he does. But anyways, Bellarmine says that this is impossible. So anyways, it is not the case.
It's impossible.
Bellarmine says that this position is impossible, that the Pope can lose the faith, but not the papacy.
Right.
So he says this is impossible because of defined church teaching. Like, he's not making this stuff up. He's a saint. Okay. Third position. The Pope becomes
that's a fallacy. Just because he's a saint, he's not right, he's not wrong?
No, I'm not saying that.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm just saying that gives weight behind his words. It's not like a lay person said this. Like, he's not infallible. He is not infallible. Right. He is fallible. But he's reasonable.
Right.
And that's the case I'm making. Okay. His third opinion. The Pope becomes a heretic by manifest heresy, openly espousing a heresy. But there are no consequences for it. So a pope can be a heretic, espouse heresy, for example, universal salvation, that's denying church dogma, but he's still pope with full authority, and because he's pope with full authority, Catholics must obey. They must obey the Pope. So Robert Bellarmine says this is an untenable position.
According to Canon Law, the Catholics, the faithful, are only also, they are supposed to follow the teaching of the church that is a bishop is teaching heresy.
Like Nestorius.
Or even currently there are many bishops who are teaching things that are contrary to the faith and tradition and the perennial teaching of the Catholic Church. Yeah. And even within the church says, you as the faithful, you don't have to follow that.
But then doesn't that call into question the unity of the faith? Because now you have priests. Think about it this way: there are priests that deny transubstantiation. They believe that the offering of the Mass is celebrating the Last Supper. There is no sacrifice.
Right.
That's denying Catholic dogma. Yeah, so if they are allowed to be members of the church, they don't believe in transubstantiation, they don't believe in the sacrifice of the Mass, doesn't that call into question the indefectibility of the church?
Well, and this is important because
we are all supposed to profess the one true faith.
Yes, but two things, and you brought it up earlier. It's important to realize that my faith doesn't depend on the faith of the priest or my bishop.
Absolutely.
So, and it's important because you mentioned that as an argument. You say, well, if the Pope is teaching this, I'm going to be condemned. So no, your salvation doesn't depend on what he's teaching. There is no correlation.
Right, but then there's complications.
Well, yeah, they can lead you to scandal and other things.
Oh, worse.
Yes. What?
Okay. One of the church laws states that the participation in false worship is forbidden.
Right, but going back to your point you were making is if somebody is teaching you, like the bishop or the in this case the Supreme Pontiff, is teaching something that is heretical or doing something that it can lead to confusion or even a scandal among the faithful, well, you're not going to be condemned by our Lord Jesus Christ just because he taught something.
Yeah, I understand that.
So that's important. And the other thing that it has to be brought into these debates is there was a heresy, it's called Donatism.
Yep.
And the idea that, okay, if this priest or this bishop or this Supreme Pontiff, they have to be pure, they have to be perfect, because if they don't, therefore the sacraments are not valid.
Well, that's a fallacy, expecting perfection.
Yeah, but that was a heresy, heresy of part of the Catholic Church, that many Catholics at one point they believe if the priest or the bishop, or in this case the Supreme Pontiff, which is the argument you are bringing, if they are not perfect, if they are not pure, if they are not perfect in their lives, therefore the sacraments are not valid. And this is the argument that a lot of people in Sedevacantism are using. The Pope is not teaching what they're supposed to be teaching, or doing certain that it can lead to confusion or scandal. Therefore, he has no office. He has lost the office, or he doesn't, or he's not the Pope in the first case. That is part of this Donatism heresy.
But I don't think Sedevacantists hold that. I think the Donatist heresy was the expectation that a Pope, you said that their lives had to be perfect. So then if you had like clergymen who are falling into mortal sin, which they're permitted to do, they're fallen humans, they have to do penance. So that's the heresy, right? They don't cease to become members of the church and their sacraments invalid just because they fall into a state of mortal sin.
Or expressing an opinion that is heretical. And you think, okay, that is heretical. And therefore I'm going to, therefore he has lost the office, which is the whole debate. I mean, we can talk about difference. But the debate today is, okay, the Pope is not the Pope because he has lost his office because he has expressed heresy, or he has done something that...
Obstinately. I would use that word. Because expressing heresy without knowing it, of course, is not... It doesn't make you a heretic.
Right. And then the argument is, then, as I said, we have the church follows the laws of the church. And let's look at other examples when they talk about this.
Okay, I just want to... because we're on the fourth claim here. So the third claim that the Pope becomes a heretic by manifest heresy, openly espousing heresy, but there are no consequences for it. So that's saying that a Pope is valid even if he espouses heresy. Transubstantiation isn't real, Jesus Christ wasn't real, and that is a Pope with full authority that we still must obey. He says that's untenable because one must have the faith to be Catholic, so faith to become Catholic, and to be Catholic is necessary to become Pope. You must be a member of the church to be Pope. Heretics are not members of the church. Because having the faith is an ontological requirement of being a Catholic, it is therefore a requirement for being Pope. Because you have to have the faith and baptism to be Catholic, therefore you must be Catholic to be Pope. Okay, that's why that position's untenable. So then that calls into question, why could any layperson be condemned as a heretic and excommunicated from the church, but not Francis?
The Supreme Pontiff.
But he ceases to be Supreme Pontiff.
Says who?
By the instance of heresy.
According to who?
According to the heresy that's being committed. Not the man.
No. It's a circular argument. Who says that?
Who says that he's a heretic?
No, that he loses his office just because he has a...
No one says it. It's intrinsic. He's stripped of his office from the moment he professes the heresy.
On what?
Based on the law. Based on...
No, but there's no law that says that.
Well... according to them, there is.
No, according to the law, there is no instance of that. And the church,
But then if the Pope becomes a heretic, he's no longer Pope, he's a heretic.
But
that's the logic. You have to follow the logic to its conclusion.
But I do follow the logic to the conclusion. And the conclusion is that in the church follows the law of the church that the church has established for millennia. And then there is no instance when it comes to the office of the Supreme Pontiff. Let's look at the couple of articles because it's very short.
Okay, but last point. So the Pope, this is his fifth opinion, and this is his opinion. Right. So he's refuted the first four. This is Pope. This is Saint Bellarmine's opinion. A Pope can defect from the faith and become a manifest heretic. By becoming a heretic, he's no longer part of the church. Okay, because a heretic cannot be part of the church. Therefore, if a heretic is not part of the church, that means he doesn't profess the true faith, which means he's not Catholic. Because to be a Catholic means baptism and professing the faith. So he would lose the papacy, and he would no longer be Pope from the moment he assented to heresy. Now, the obvious question is, how do we know when a Pope has committed manifest heresy? You can't have a council because they can't judge the Pope, but they can judge the manner. They can prove that he is teaching heresy, which is what manifest heresy is. It's not saying it's condemning the heresy, not necessarily the man, because then that calls into question, was he a Pope to begin with? Think about even marriage, right? Let's say that there's a married couple and the marriage, let's say 5 years in, the man starts abusing the woman and he's beating her.
Or vice versa.
Yes, or vice versa, of course. And that calls into question the validity of the marriage to begin with, and maybe grounds for annulment, right? Because we don't know what his intentions were when he got married. We just don't know. And let's say that marriage gets annulled. So the marriage was never valid to begin with. Wouldn't it be the same logic applied to that of a heretical Pope, where everyone thought he was Pope, but then he starts preaching heresy? Doesn't that at least minimum, we can't depose him, but it calls into question the legitimacy of that election, of his so-called papacy.
Right, but this is different because you're talking about marriage and we're talking about the supreme.
I understand, but I'm just trying to appeal to the logic.
No, that's a false logic. That's a fallacy. You're applying something totally different to make a case, which I understand, but it's a false logic. Even within canon law, in the laws of the church, the way the Supreme Pontiff is treated is different from the laws applying to the bishops. Even the canon law, when they could talk about the privation of the office, but not of the Supreme Pontiff, the privation from office, they talk about Canon 196. They say privation from office, namely a penalty for a delict, can be done only in according to the norm of the law. Right? You have to follow the law. You cannot, a bishop to punishing a clergy, they cannot just do something willy-nilly. They have to follow the law of the church. Mm-hmm. When it comes to the removal, for example, they say removal of the office, Canon 192. A person is removed from office either by a decree issued legitimately by the competent authority.
But that wouldn't work on a Pope because there's no competent authority over a Pope. Absolutely.
That's exactly my point, is that, okay, the canon law, the laws of the church says, okay, when it comes to the clergy, because the canon law applies to the clergy.
Yes.
Some laws apply to the faithful, which is new, 1983, but there are just a few canons to do with the faithful. The rest is how we as a church, we conduct ourselves. But when it comes to the removal, it's the removal of the office maybe of the bishop or different offices or the clergy. But they don't talk about the Pope because you cannot take the Pope, the same as the king, for example, cannot be taken to court.
That's right.
So that's about it. So the removal.
So that would rule out the idea of a council or any sort of formal regulatory body having any power to depose a Pope.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah.
But then that means that Pope.
No, we are in the Catholic Church. That means that
Pope would have to be a valid Pope.
And who determines that?
Well, that's what I'm saying is it seems that there are
according to the law, is valid when
but the law doesn't apply to the Pope. Yes, so that's a moot point.
The law of the church says he's a valid Pope because he was legitimately chosen by the bishop, by the cardinal bishop.
Okay, so then you're saying the moment a Pope is chosen to be Pope, he is always Pope until he dies, regardless of how he behaves.
Well, the Canon Law doesn't look into his private behavior.
No, but in public. I'm talking public.
Well, private or public behavior.
I'm talking public. So when Pope Francis, I'm not talking about what he does in his off time. I'm talking about when he's flying to the Middle East and going into mosques and going into synagogues. Is he still...
Welcome to the Catholic Church.
No, but is he still Pope? Absolutely.
He is. Because that's how the church runs herself. How? By the authority of his office. Even if he does something wrong, I get it, Adam, I get it, that there are many things that we don't like about the Pope. Fine, I get it. But that doesn't deprive
I'm not talking about what I don't like. I'm talking about when I heard that the church changed its mind on the doctrine of justification. That actually started with JP2. He wrote a declaration to Lutherans saying that Luther was right on the doctrine of justification. When I read that, I didn't know what that was. So to me, it didn't matter. I did not like it because I didn't know what it was. Does that mean because I don't have an opinion that it is right? Because I'm not talking about things I don't like. I'm talking about things that are against the faith.
Yeah, but he doesn't lose the reality, unfortunately.
So the Pope can never lose the faith.
You're talking about his office or his faith?
I'm talking about his faith.
His faith, he's a human person. He's a human being, so any Pope can wake up and say, I don't believe in God.
Okay, so then what happens?
And I've lost the faith.
So then is he still Pope?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not...
You don't know?
I don't know.
Neither do I. But I would say, I think... he probably would lose. I think. That's my opinion.
It's an opinion, but it's not...
And am I unsafe for holding that opinion?
Well, what he could do, maybe he could be advised, this is hypothetical, he could be advised to step down, to resign, because he can
But
resign.
He won't be.
Well...
Because what do the popes do? They have the power to elect a college of cardinals.
Right.
Look at how modernism has crept into the church. This is something that Pope St. Pius X, Pope Leo XIII, they all warned and prophesied about this happening. In fact, Pope St. Pius X thought that Thessalonians and the Great Apostasy was happening during his reign. If you read his first encyclical in 1903, he actually talks about that.
Right.
He thought that the modernism in the church was so bad then.
So the crisis that you referred to at the beginning, the church has
goes back.
Every time there's been a crisis. You look at the history of the Catholic Church, every single time there's been a crisis. There hasn't been a time in the history of the church where everything was hunky-dory. There's always been a crisis.
In the church or surrounding the church?
Both. In societies, and in the church, within the Catholic Church, there's always been an example that comes to mind is the 21 ecumenical councils. They are called because there was a crisis, there was a heresy, and there's always been persecution. There hasn't been a time in history in the Catholic Church when the Catholic Church hasn't been persecuted in different areas. So there's always been a crisis, but that doesn't mean just because we are still living in the times of crisis, that therefore the bishops are not the bishops, the popes are not the popes, or some of the prophecies, again with the Supreme Pontiff, we specifically about the Supreme Pontiff. That's how the Catholic Church runs herself. And that's it. I mean, a lot of people say, well, how come that women cannot be elected or chosen priests? Well, that's the way there are theological arguments. But some priests, they say, well, I have to be celibate. Well, yeah, that's the rule of the church. Now, it wasn't always like that, but that's the rule of the church. And if you are the Pope and you are the Supreme Pontiff and you have the supreme full authority of the church, some people say, well, I don't agree with that. Well, that's the way it is.
Yeah, but we're not here's the thing. We are not having a disagreement over the teachings. I agree with everything you read in the Canon Law. I agree. There's no denying it.
Right.
You cannot depose a valid
also,
pope. But then it gets murky. Here's where it gets murky. I mean, and that's where I agree with what the saints say here. And I think that I'm entitled to that opinion, and I'm not putting myself in danger of not being Catholic by holding the opinion that not. There is reasonable doubt of the validity of the popes. Because when Saint Athanasius says, in the case which pope would become a heretic, he would find himself by that fact alone and without any other sentence separated from the church. A head separated from a body cannot, as long as it remains separated, be head of the same body from which it was cut off. Yeah. A pope who would be separated from the church by heresy, therefore, would by that very fact itself cease to be head of the church. He could not be a heretic and remain pope because, since he is outside of the church, he cannot possess the keys of the church. St. Alphonsus, if ever a pope, as a private person, should fall into heresy, he would at once fall from the pontificate. St. Francis de Sales, now when a pope is explicitly a heretic, he falls ipso facto from his dignity and out of the church. St. Robert Bellarmine again, the principle is most certain. The non-Christian cannot in any way become pope. As Cajetan himself admits, the reason for this is he cannot be head of that which he is not a member. Now he who is not a Christian is not a member of the church, and a manifest heretic is not a Christian, as is clearly taught by St. Cyprian, St. Athanasius, St. Augustine, St. Jerome, and others. Therefore, the manifest heretic cannot be pope. Given that, the fathers, the ancient fathers, the church fathers, all agree that when a pope commits heresy, it is a manifest heretic, that they believe he would cease to be pope from the moment of history. I find myself aligned with that argumentation because I see the logic in it. Because to me, you can't be a pope and a heretic at the same time. And from what I see with my own eyes about Assisi, about the Francis saying that Luther was right on justification, denying church dogma, to me, I think that's where it crosses the line. If Francis was getting drunk and fornicating, that's a different story. That's immorality, right? And he would be in a state of mortal sin, but he'd certainly still be a part of the church. That's different. His job, the Pope's primary role, is to shepherd, to lead the faith. His sole occupation is protect and preserve the faith. And we must seriously ask ourselves, has that happened since Vatican II? I would argue no. They've attacked it at every turn. Going back to what Pope St. Pius X said, modernism is the synthesis of all heresies, and it seeks, quote for quote, it seeks the destruction of faith. Is that not what we've seen with John the 23rd through Francis proclaiming themselves being modernists? Whether they think they're saving the church or not is irrelevant. In actuality, they've done nothing but attack the church. We've lost the mass. We've lost the reverence in the sanctuary. We've lost many good priests. We've lost seminaries. We're losing buildings by the year. Look at the things we've lost. We're losing our culture. We're losing our identity. And with modernism, everything's becoming meaningless. They've actually managed to attack the faith in such a way that many have detracted from the faith. They no longer even call themselves Catholic.
Right.
In addition, now Francis himself is actually attacking the papacy itself. What he teaches the papacy is a complete contradiction of the chair of St. Peter. What do we do about this as Catholics? Are we not entitled at least to with reasonable doubt, look at what's happening and say, things are not good and it's coming from the head?
So what we can do, okay, there are many points. Answering your question, what do we do as Catholics? Well, keep the faith.
Yes, absolutely. The true faith.
You cannot change the laws of the church because we are lay people and we cannot change it. So just try to sanctify your life and to try to, my faith that is not determined by the faith of this bishop or that bishop or this priest or the pope.
Thank God.
Thank God. Answering the question, the other question that you bring to the table is, okay, the church by any stretch of the imagination, as she's losing, seminarians, vocations, you name it, right? Marriages. There is a crisis. And that's why it's more important your personal life, how you conduct yourself, and your prayer, and the church teaches, right? Sacrifice. Now, when it comes to the laws of the church, it's up to the clergy, the bishops, and the pope. That's why in 1983 they changed some of the legislation. Most of them based on the Canon Law of 1917. Not all of them. They changed it. Something to do with the rights of the faithful that it wasn't in Canon 1917. Whereas when it comes to the Supreme Pontiff, which is the whole debate, is, you are stuck. You cannot, that's the only couple of canon laws, and the Supreme Pontiff has supreme authority, full authority, and you as a Catholic, you are stuck.
I mean, I'll finish on this note, but the things we can do, like you said, keep the faith, profess the faith, stay true to the faith, even in these confusing times. Like, if we know the truth, we have to hold to the truth, because that is defending God. God is truth. And I think we have the obligation and the duty to defend that truth, defend God, even if it means offending other people, even if it means that we come across as disrespectful towards other men. Well, guess what? I don't look at other men as God. Other men are not God. We're all fallen before God, and I'd rather follow God and risk offending men than to compromise my faith to respect men.
What I would also say is you have to trust God.
Yes.
Just because you might have a bad priest or a bad bishop or a bad pope or a bad manager or a bad king or a bad... you have to... At times we ask God to have it now, to have what we want now. And the paradox... at times in your personal life or your faith works that way because you have a bad manager or a bad father or a bad bishop or a bad pope. That's the paradox, can help you to increase your faith.
Exactly.
And to learn your faith.
Yeah.
And there are many things there you can do. First, you have influence on your life. You have influence at times on some people around you. When it comes to the church, the laws of the church, at times they have changed it over the history of the church. But again, just because somebody, a bishop, in this case the Supreme Pontiff, which is the whole debate, has done something that it can be can create a scandal or confusion or even some heretical statements, according to my understanding of the Canon Law, that doesn't deprive him from being the Pope, because he was elected in a legitimate fashion, and that's the church. They say, that's how we as the church, we organize ourselves. We don't have two popes, we don't have three popes. The Pontiff is the Supreme Pontiff, and some people might say, I don't agree with that. It should be, the authority should be given to the national churches or the local churches. And actually that's currently the debate with the synods on synodality, right? And there have always been a debate like that. How much authority should the Pope have? There's always been a debate. And at times some kings wanted to have the power on how to elect the bishops or even the Pope. And currently there's the whole debate on how do we distribute that authority. But the law, even when Pope Francis, a couple of times he has said, I'm the Pope and I have basically the full authority, and what I say, it has to be done. And we might not agree with that, but that's the reality.
Yeah.
And also with the Sedevacantism, one of the issues, and according to also teaching of the Catholic Church, when you don't subject yourself to any legitimate authority of the Church, you stop being a Catholic, which is an important point to bring to the attention of some people, because some people say, I don't recognize the authority of a Pope for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you don't recognize the authority of the Pope, and the whole authority of the Church comes from the Pope, because even, for example, this is something important to understand, the priests officiate the sacraments on behalf of the bishop. The bishops basically is on behalf of the Pope, the Vicar of Christ, and the successor of Peter. If somebody says, I don't believe that this Pope is the Pope, and the previous one, and the previous one, and therefore I don't subject myself to any authority, according to the teaching of the Catholic Church and the popes, they said, then you're not part of the church.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not part of the church, then you cannot call yourself Catholic.
Yeah.
So how do you respond to that?
I think that would be a topic for another video because our time is up. But yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head that we need to better understand our faith. We need to observe and be aware of what is going on. But keep in mind that the most important thing you can do is cling to your faith, cling to God, pray your rosary. That's your weapon of spiritual warfare in these confusing times where and I truly believe that a lot of what's going on is beyond our grasp in intellect. There's so much we don't know, and we can't know it all.
And I can understand why at times a lot of people say, I cannot believe, if they feel scandalized or disorientated by what a bishop or the Pope has said, then the natural reaction is, if he said this, if he did this, I cannot believe it. Therefore, conceptually, I have to come to the conclusion that he couldn't possibly be the Pope or the bishop or a priest because he's teaching this contrary to the faith. It's a way of reconciling that conflict. I get it, but unfortunately, that's not how the church runs herself. And so
great.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. That's great.